This is the image they tried to bury, a photograph taken Wednesday morning, February 26, 2026, inside the Japanese Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry in Tokyo. Two flags, not the American flag and the Japanese flag, the way it has been for 80 years. The Canadian maple leaf and the blue circle of stars of the European Union flanking the rising sun. For the first time since the end of World War II, Japan has signed a landmark trade framework that explicitly bypasses the United States of America. Not a back-channel negotiation, not a quiet memorandum. A $180 billion integrated supply chain and tariff alignment pact with Canada and the European Union, brokered under the CPTPP EU docking framework that Mark Carney has been building for months. The announcement hit the wires at 6:14 a.m. Eastern Time. By 6:20, futures on the Dow were down 340 points. By 7 the White House switchboard was reportedly overwhelmed. This is not a trade deal in the traditional sense. This is a geopolitical defection. Japan, America's most important economic ally in Asia, the country that just pledged $550 billion in investment and loans to the United States under Trump's bilateral tariff framework, has just hedged that bet with a massive parallel agreement that routes critical supply chains through Ottawa, Brussels, Singapore, and Melbourne instead of through Los Angeles and Houston. We are talking about semiconductors. We are talking about rare earth minerals. We are talking about automotive components. We are talking about liquefied natural gas contracts worth $43 billion alone. And we are talking about the total collapse of Donald Trump's bilateral tariff strategy, the one he bragged about at the State of the Union address just last night. In this special report, we are going to break down exactly how this deal was assembled in secret. We are going to explain why the Supreme Court tariff ruling last Friday made this inevitable. We are going to show you the specific industries about to be eviscerated, and we are going to answer the question nobody in Washington wants to ask. Has America just lost the Pacific? Buckle up. The tectonic plates are shifting beneath your feet. To understand why Japan made this move today, you have to understand the catastrophe that unfolded last Friday, February 20th. The United States Supreme Court, in a 6-3 decision, ruled that Donald Trump's use of the International Emergency Economic Powers Act to impose sweeping reciprocal tariffs was unconstitutional. The so-called Liberation Day tariffs, the ones that hit Japanese goods at rates up to 25%, were struck down in a single afternoon. Within hours, Trump scrambled. He signed executive orders imposing a new 10% global tariff under Section 122 of the Trade Act of 1974. By Saturday morning, he had raised it to 15% via a Truth Social post. The problem is that Section 122 tariffs can only last 150 days without congressional approval. They are a temporary bandage on a severed artery. Here is what you need to understand about the Japanese position. Last July, Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi negotiated a bilateral deal with Trump. Japan agreed to a staggering $550 billion investment package in the United States, including natural gas facilities, AI data centers, and semiconductor plants, in exchange for a tariff cap of 15%. That deal was built on the legal foundation of the IEEPA tariffs. The Supreme Court just demolished that foundation. Sources inside the Japanese Ministry of Foreign Affairs say that by Saturday evening Tokyo time, senior officials had concluded that the American tariff architecture was structurally unsound. The investment commitments were still technically in place, but the legal basis for the reciprocal framework had evaporated. Japan was paying $550 billion for a 15% rate that every other country on Earth was now getting for free under Section 122. According to leaked cables reported by Nikkei Asia, Trade Minister Ryosei Akazawa told his counterpart at the Commerce Department, Howard Lutnick, in a 40-minute phone call on Monday, that Japan expected to not be treated less favorably than countries that had made no investment commitments whatsoever. The response from Washington was reportedly vague, non-committal, bureaucratic silence. But here is the catch. While Washington was fumbling with legal technicalities and contradictory fact sheets, Ottawa was already on the phone. Sources familiar with the negotiations say that Mark Carney's personal envoy, John Hannaford, had been in Singapore earlier this month meeting with Japanese and ASEAN trade representatives. The groundwork for the CPTPP EU bridge had been laid at the Melbourne summit in November 2025, where CPTPP ministers and EU officials held their first ever joint dialogue. Carney had published an op-ed in The Economist calling for creative docking arrangements between trading blocs. Nobody in Washington took it seriously. They should have. The architecture of the $180 billion pact works like this. It is not a new free trade agreement. That would take years. Instead, it is a rules of origin cumulation framework. Products manufactured with components from any CPTPP member nation, that is Canada, Japan, Australia, the UK, Singapore, Vietnam, Mexico, and 7 others, can now qualify for preferential tariff treatment when exported to the European Union and vice versa. The technical term is diagonal cumulation. It means a Toyota built in Japan using Canadian aluminum, Malaysian rubber, and British electronics can enter the EU market at a tariff rate lower than anything the United States currently offers. The $180 billion figure represents the estimated annual trade flow that will be redirected, restructured, or newly created under this framework within the first 3 years. Let us get specific about the sectors being targeted because this is where the American economy starts hemorrhaging. Target 1, automotive components. Japan exports approximately $52 billion worth of auto parts annually. Under the old framework, a significant share flowed into American assembly plants. Under the new pact, Japanese manufacturers now have tariff-equivalent incentives to route those components through EU-aligned supply chains. Volkswagen, BMW, and Stellantis are reportedly already in discussions with Toyota and Honda about integrated production lines that bypass American ports entirely. Target 2, semiconductors and advanced electronics. Japan controls roughly 28% of the global semiconductor materials market, including silicon wafers, photoresist, and etching chemicals. The new framework creates a preferential corridor for these materials to flow into European chip fabrication facilities, including the new TSMC plant in Dresden and Intel's facility in Magdeburg. American chip makers who depend on Japanese inputs will face a competitive disadvantage measured in billions. Target 3, liquefied natural gas. This is the one nobody is talking about. Japan is the world's largest importer of LNG. Under the bilateral deal with Trump, Japan committed to purchasing significant volumes from American export terminals. The new CPTPP EU framework includes energy security provisions that allow Japan to diversify its LNG sourcing through Canadian terminals in British Columbia and Australian facilities in Queensland. The estimated value of this diversification is $43 billion over 5 years. American LNG producers in Louisiana and Texas just lost their most captive customer. Target 4, critical minerals and rare earths. Japan has been quietly building alternative supply chains for lithium, cobalt, and rare earth elements through partnerships with Australia and Canada. The new pact formalizes these arrangements under a joint procurement framework worth an estimated $22 billion. Japan's supply chain for defense-grade materials, the same materials that go into F-35 components and missile guidance systems, is being restructured to reduce dependence on American intermediaries. Australian lithium from the Pilbara region, Canadian cobalt from northern Ontario, Vietnamese rare earths from Lai Chau province, all of it flowing through the new CPTPP EU corridor, processed in Japanese refineries and exported to European manufacturers. The strategic implications are staggering. The Pentagon depends on Japanese processed materials for a significant share of its advanced weapons systems. Those materials are now being allocated to a trading framework that America is not part of. Let us get technical about the rules of origin mechanism, because this is the specific legal instrument that makes the whole framework operational. Under existing trade agreements, a product qualifies for preferential tariffs based on where it was substantially transformed. If a car engine is built in Japan using 60% Japanese components, it qualifies as Japanese under the CPTPP. But what about the other 40%? Under the old rules, if those components came from the EU, they did not count toward the origin threshold. The car might face higher tariffs entering European markets. Under diagonal cumulation, those EU components now count as if they were made within the CPTPP block. The origin threshold is met more easily. The tariff drops. Multiply this across thousands of product categories, from pharmaceuticals to precision machinery to agricultural processing equipment, and you begin to see the scale. According to trade economists, diagonal cumulation between the CPTPP and EU could unlock between $140 billion and $220 billion in redirected trade within 36 months. The $180 billion figure is not aspirational, it is conservative. Now here is where this moves from a trade story to a constitutional crisis story. Remember, Trump told the nation last night during his State of the Union address that almost all countries and corporations want to keep the deals they already made. He said this with cameras rolling. He said this with Japan's trade minister watching from Tokyo. And by the time the speech ended, the $180 billion pact was already signed. Sources inside the West Wing described the mood this morning as volcanic. The president reportedly learned about the deal from a Fox Business alert on his phone, not from his own trade team. He is said to have demanded an emergency call with Prime Minister Takaichi, who is scheduled to visit Washington next month. But here is the impossible position. Trump cannot retaliate against Japan without destroying his own narrative. He spent months bragging about the $550 billion investment deal as proof that tariffs work. If he punishes Japan now, those investment projects, the $36 billion in facilities announced just last week, collapse. Toyota cancels the battery plant. SoftBank pulls the AI data center funding. The $550 billion becomes a $550 billion humiliation. It gets worse. The legal architecture Trump is standing on is crumbling in real time. The Section 122 tariffs expire in 150 days, roughly mid-July. Without congressional authorization, they vanish, and Congress is not going to authorize them. The Supreme Court ruling emboldened both Democrats and a growing faction of Senate Republicans who view the tariff chaos as an economic wrecking ball. Sources on Capitol Hill say that at least 12 Republican senators have privately indicated they will not vote to extend emergency trade authority. Trump's tariff wall is not a wall, it is a sandcastle, and the tide is coming in. Let us talk about the domino effect, because the Japan defection does not happen in isolation. It cascades. India paused its own interim trade deal with Washington this week, citing a need for clarity. The European Parliament postponed its vote on the EU-US tariff agreement for a second time. Canada's Doug Ford said publicly that no deal is better than a bad deal. Mexico is watching. South Korea is watching. Taiwan, which negotiated its own $550 billion style framework, is reportedly reconsidering the terms. Every country that struck a bilateral deal with Trump based on the IEEPA tariff threat is now recalculating. The threat is gone. The Supreme Court killed it. And if the threat is gone, why would you pay the premium? This is the contagion effect of legal uncertainty. It does not just affect one deal. It poisons every deal simultaneously. Here is what nobody in the mainstream media is connecting. The CPTPP-EU bridge is not just an economic arrangement. It is the skeleton of a new world order that explicitly excludes the United States. 39 countries, 1.5 billion consumers, a combined GDP that rivals America's. And it is being built by a Canadian Prime Minister who stood at Davos in January and said in so many words that intermediate powers are not powerless and they have the capacity to build a new order. He was not bluffing. The institutional architecture is already being erected. Rules of origin alignment is the foundation. Digital trade standards are being harmonized. Investment screening protocols are being synchronized. Dispute resolution mechanisms are being drafted. This is not a protest. This is a construction project. And America was not invited to the groundbreaking. What does this look like for the average American worker? Let us push the scenario to the extreme. The auto worker in Michigan who builds transmissions for Toyota vehicles assembled in Kentucky is about to learn that those transmissions are being sourced from a new plant in the Czech Republic. The LNG technician in Lake Charles, Louisiana, is about to learn that Japan's next 10-year contract goes to a Canadian facility in Kitimat, British Columbia. The semiconductor engineer in Phoenix who depends on Japanese photoresist is about to learn that those chemicals are now flowing to Dresden first, with American facilities getting whatever is left over. This is not abstract economics. This is the sound of supply chains being rerouted around you. Your 401k, your pension fund, your job security, all of it depends on the assumption that America is the indispensable hub of global trade. That assumption just died in a conference room in Tokyo. The psychological dimension is devastating. Trump built his entire second term around the idea that tariffs give America leverage, that every country on earth would come crawling to Washington with investment pledges and concessions because the alternative, being locked out of the American market, was unthinkable. Japan just proved the alternative is not only thinkable but preferable. The $180 billion pact says to the world, there are other customers, there are other supply chains, there are other partners who do not change the rules every 150 days based on a social media post. The projection of American economic power relies on the perception of American reliability. The Supreme Court ruling destroyed the legal reliability. Trump's erratic response destroyed the political reliability. And Japan, the most cautious, most deliberate, most alliance-loyal nation in the democratic world, just announced that reliability matters more than loyalty. What does Putin see when he reads this? What does Xi Jinping see? They see the American alliance system fracturing along economic lines. For decades, the security alliance and the economic alliance were fused together. You bought American weapons and you traded through American markets. Japan is now saying, we will keep the weapons, but we are diversifying the trade. That separation is a crack in the foundation of American hegemony that no amount of aircraft carriers can repair. China has been trying to pry Japan away from the American economic orbit for 20 years. Trump just did it for them in 18 months. How does this play with the MAGA base? It splits them. The instinctive reaction is fury at Japan. They betrayed us. They took our money and stabbed us in the back. Expect Truth Social to be flooded with calls to sanction Tokyo, pull the troops, let China have them. But the sophisticated conservatives, the business owners, the manufacturing executives, the people who actually understand supply chains, they see something different. They see an administration that created so much legal and economic chaos that a 75-year alliance just cracked. They see a tariff strategy that was supposed to bring jobs home, but instead pushed the entire world into a trading bloc that excludes America. The donors see it clearest of all. The Wall Street money, the Silicon Valley money, the defense contractor money. They are on the phone this morning with their lobbyists asking one question: how do we get into the CPTPP EU framework before our competitors do? The invisible primary for 2028 is accelerating. Senators are distancing themselves. The coalition is fracturing in real time. Let us push the worst-case scenario. It is now mid-July 2026. The Section 122 tariffs have expired. Congress has refused to reauthorize them. The CPTPP EU framework is operational and expanding. Indonesia and the Philippines have joined the accession talks. The UAE is in. South Korea has submitted its application. American manufacturers are watching their Japanese suppliers redirect components to European assembly lines. Detroit is hemorrhaging contracts. The Port of Long Beach reports a 23% decline in Asian container traffic. The trade deficit, which Trump promised to eliminate, has widened to a record $1.2 trillion because American exports have nowhere to go. Every major trading bloc on Earth has preferential arrangements with each other, except with the United States. America has become the North Korea of trade policy, isolated, sanctioned by its own choices, and utterly alone. That is the worst case. And as of this morning, it is no longer hypothetical, it is trajectory. The historical parallels are haunting. In the 1930s, the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act triggered a cascade of retaliatory trade barriers that collapsed global commerce and deepened the Great Depression. Historians estimate that world trade fell 65% between 1929 and 1934. We are not there yet, but the pattern is unmistakable. A major power turns inward, its allies diversify, trade blocs form that exclude the protectionist nation, and the country that thought it was protecting its workers discovers it has isolated its economy. The founders understood this. Alexander Hamilton in Federalist 11 argued that the power of the American Republic would rest on its commercial connections to the world. He warned against any policy that would make America a minor player in global trade. The Constitution itself, in Article 1, Section 8, gives Congress the power to regulate commerce with foreign nations, not the president. The Supreme Court just enforced that principle. And the response from this administration has been to throw a tantrum, slap on a temporary tariff, and watch as the most important economic ally in the Pacific signs a deal with Canada. This is not just a trade failure. This is a stress test of the American system, and the system is showing cracks from the foundation to the roof. Can a democracy survive a leader who treats alliances as transactions? Can an economy survive when its own Supreme Court has to intervene to stop its president from waging illegal trade wars? Can the world's reserve currency maintain its status when the country that issues it is being systematically excluded from the new trade architecture? These are not rhetorical questions. They have answers. And the answers are arriving faster than anyone in Washington anticipated. So how does this end? It does not end cleanly. Watch for three things in the next 72 hours. Watch for the White House to announce emergency consultations with Tokyo. Watch for Trump to threaten secondary sanctions against countries participating in the CPTPP EU framework. And watch for the Japanese markets when they open tonight, because if Japanese equities rally on this news, it means the financial world is pricing in a future where the American market is no longer the center of gravity. Watch the bond market. If the yield on the 10-year Treasury spikes above 5% this week, it means foreign buyers, the same buyers who finance America's $36 trillion national debt, are demanding a risk premium for holding American paper. Japan holds over $1 trillion in U.S. Treasury bonds. If Tokyo starts quietly diversifying those holdings, the cascading effect on interest rates, mortgage rates, and the dollar will be catastrophic. The response from Trump will not be a policy paper. It will be a Truth Social post at 3 a.m. It will be a threat to pull American troops from Okinawa. It will be a demand that Japan double its investment commitment or face 50% tariffs, tariffs he no longer has the legal authority to impose. The rage will be real. The leverage will not. For one man sitting in the Oval Office watching the alliance system he inherited crumble under the weight of his own policies, this is the nightmare scenario. He bet everything on bilateral deals. He bet everything on the idea that America's market was so big, so essential, that no country would dare walk away. Japan just walked away. Not out of anger, not out of ideology, out of arithmetic. The numbers stopped adding up, and when the numbers stop adding up, loyalty is a luxury that no nation can afford. The trade routes are being redrawn. The alliances are being restructured. The $180 billion pact is just the beginning. Subscribe. Stay close. The maps we have been using for 80 years are being torn up, and the new ones are being drawn without us. This is not a news cycle. This is a turning point, and the history books will remember this week as the moment the world moved on.